Hi everyone, it's Nick with Build Up Advisory Group, and it's Fast Forward Fridays, a web series where we will quickly build what you know about infrastructure design in the nonprofit sector. Today's Fast Forward topic is the critical components of a highly effective grant agreement. We've talked about grant agreements in other Fast Forward Fridays. In Fast Forward Friday episode 10, for example, we discussed the importance of using a grant agreement for each grant investment, particularly when making grants to organizations that aren't public charities. Grant making is crucial to ensuring that an organization's infrastructure is strong. For funders, the more efficient and robust your grant process and grant making are, the better you can partner with organizations and individuals around the world to effect change. And as a grant recipient, grants can provide the capacity you need to build the foundation and capacity to do your best work. So, the agreement that underpins all of this transformational grant making is extremely important. As in-house counsel, I've drafted, revised, reviewed, and negotiated these agreements with grassroots organizations, public charities, social impact vehicles, and corporate and private philanthropies to support funding for projects around the globe. And this includes countries under strict regulatory regimes and countries of the parties involved in the agreement that have complex relationships with each other. So I've seen agreements play out in different contexts and regions. And from this experience, I've identified four critical components of these agreements to make them highly effective. First, check the tone of your grant agreement. People often overlook the importance of tone when it comes to grant agreements. Yes, it's a legally binding document, but that doesn't mean you have to use legal terms without explanation or dense language in order to convey the key points and responsibilities within the agreement. Remember that at its most fundamental level, this agreement is a communication tool. If your team involved in the grant does not understand what each provision within the agreement means or requires, then the parties should not agree to the terms of the grant agreement and it should be revised or renegotiated. Second, the purpose of the grant must be, on its face, a charitable purpose. Just because you know the project or support will allow the grantee to do good work doesn't mean that using a purpose that is so vague that only the program or internal team understands it works well. The grant purpose should not only reflect the actual purpose of the grant, but it should also be clearly charitable in its description. You know you have the right grant purpose when you have a clear, charitable purpose that someone with no context of the work being proposed within the agreement can understand it and sees it as something clearly charitable. Third, be clear on the type of support that's being awarded and make sure all of the requirements align with that support. So if you're awarding a general support grant to a public charity, for example, you should ensure that your charitable purpose, spending, and reporting requirements align with what is needed for a general support grant and not for a project support grant. The implications of getting this alignment wrong can be significant and turn an otherwise flexible grant into a restricted grant with increased monitoring responsibilities and potential penalties. Fourth, state explicitly what is permitted and expected during the grant term and what is not for both parties. Be clear on what's required of the funder and the grantee. Don't rely on side conversations outside of the grant agreement or verbal assurances that aren't reflected in the text of the grant agreement. Everything that pertains to the grant and how the parties should engage during the grant term should be included in the grant agreement itself. So that also means that you should be clear on the length of the grant term and ensure that the obligations of each party can be addressed within the grant term. These four components apply to both grant makers and grant recipients. When you're the grant maker, creating an agreement that covers these components is critical. And when you're the grantee, you should ensure these components are present. And if they're not, negotiate that they be included. An agreement is not static in that sense. Instead, the grant agreement should reflect the true relationship and responsibilities of the parties involved. That's what it's supposed to do. A grant agreement is more than a technical tool. It's the formal start of a funding relationship that should accurately reflect and support how you're going to work together for vulnerable and marginalized communities. And that's our Fast Build. I want to hear how you are thinking about grant agreements. I would love to hear from you and about your experience in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful weekend and keep building bravely.